Well, if you're there in Ephesians 5, we read one verse last week, just one, verse number 21, and I want to begin there again. I told you last week, that's the foundation of where we're going throughout the end of chapter 5 and into chapter number 6. And so let's begin there again. Ephesians 5, verse number 21 says this: submitting to one another in the fear of God. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as also Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, just as the church is subject to Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her, that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word, that he might present her to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. So husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as the Lord does the church. For we are members of his body, and of his flesh, and of his bones. For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother, and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Nevertheless, let each one of you in particular so love his wife as himself, and let his wife see that she respects her husband. Chapter 6, verse 1 opens with these words: children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with you and that you may live long on the earth. And you fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and the admonition of the Lord. Now you read these verses and they, at least in the modern world that we live in, they almost sound alien to what we hear spoken around us all the time. And quite frankly, they are alien. They're not of man, they're not of earth. This is the mind of God. These are the thoughts of heaven that have been conveyed to us. So they don't naturally appeal to what we're drawn to. And so this is one of the reasons why I would say over the next couple of weeks, this is not going to be a politically correct sermon series. This is going to be week after week of you feeling perhaps uncomfortable and maybe even at times angry and not agreeing. It's unfortunate because it is God's word and it is the instructions on how to have a perfect home, a home that God designed. It's God's blueprint for what he designed for the first institution that he created, the home, marriage, the family. And as you'll look through this, I'm not going to teach, this is basically, I'm going to give an introduction today to marriage. And then over the next couple of weeks, we'll dive into it, break it apart. But this is going to be just kind of an introduction. But just so you understand, there's a couple of parts here, clearly noted here. In verse number 22, he talks about the wives and he gives instructions to them. Verse 25, he gives instructions to the husbands. In verse number 1 of chapter 6, he gives instructions to the children. In chapter 6, he also gives instructions to employees and employers, which we'll get into a little bit later. But these are categories where there is submission and leadership, and there is brokenness, and that brokenness has existed in this institution, the institution of the home, since you could argue, the beginning of time. And for the wives, actually for everyone, look at verse number 21, he says, submitting to one another. As I had mentioned last week, that's the foundation here. That is the overarching theme of this entire section. Wives are to submit to the leadership of their husbands, and husbands are to submit to the needs of their wives. Children are to submit to the leadership of their parents, and parents are to submit to the needs of their children. Employees are to submit to the leadership of their employers, and employers are to submit to the needs of their employees. That's the whole, in a perfect world, that's really what this when everyone is submissive to each other, it doesn't remove leadership. Leadership is a necessity to society. Without leadership, there's chaos, there's anarchy. And God is a God of order, as the Bible tells us. And so there has to be leadership. But leadership does not mean that there's not a lack of submission among all. We are all submitting to one another's needs, benefiting one another, loving one another, taking care of one another. And in a perfect world, that is exactly what he is presenting the home to look like, and the relationship between employees and employers. You could even look into other passages in the New Testament, like Romans chapter 13, which talks about the relationship between government and citizens. It calls for citizens to be submissive to the government as the leaders of the citizens, and it calls for the government to be submissive to the needs of the citizens. It's a mutual relationship of benefit. That is God's design. When the world works exactly as God designed it to work, everyone is serving each other. Everyone is lifting each other up. Everyone is benefiting one another. Everyone is making each other better. That is God's perfect design for society, for the family, and as we're going to look at over the next couple of weeks, for marriage. And so that all is under attack, by the way. I think you understand that. That marriage is broken in the world that we live in right now, and marriage is in trouble. Of course, that's nothing new. That has always been the case. But it seems more evident now. It seems to be getting exasperated with each passing generation, where the brokenness is growing more and more. Decline in traditional marriage is at an all-time high. A Gallup poll from 2021 noted that 48% of U.S. adults were married in 2020. That's down from 55% from the same poll in 2006. That's a massive shift. Shifts in society don't move that quickly, but it is, and we're watching it advance more and more. The younger generations, including Generation Z and millennials, are less likely to prioritize marriage, with only 29% of millennials and fewer in Gen Z adults seeing it as essential. One of the reasons you're seeing a decline a lot of people would look to the statistics, the divorce, and say, well, divorce is going down. No, divorce is actually statistically, divorce is going up. I say, well, no, that's not true. There's less, the numbers. No, you don't understand. The numbers are skewed because less people are getting married. Divorce is actually going up based off of the limited number that's represented there, but it's because very, very few people are actually getting married. Estimates suggest about 41% of first marriages end in divorce, with a higher rates in the second marriage being around 60%, and those who are married for the third time, it's about 70% in divorce. That's a unsustainable number for society. And cohabitating together without marriage obviously is growing like we haven't ever seen in history. Estimates are suggesting that in 2019, that it's around 38% of adults ages 25 to 54 were unmarried. Even though they would call themselves married, it's not officially married. They're cohabiting together. In ages 18 to 24, living with an unmarried partner rose from 0.1% to a staggering 9.4%. That's astronomical in the world of statistics. And so no, things are not getting better. They're getting far worse, and they're expanding in how bad that they're getting. Within the LGBTQ community, the identification of the younger generation is exploding. Gallup poll from 2024 says that 7.6% of the U.S. adults identify as LGBTQ+, with 19.7% of that being of Gen Z. Those born between the years 1997 and 2012. And those that are 18 to 28, a poll shows in 25, that number is around 9.2% for millennials, and it is about 4.6% for Gen X and about 2% for boomers. Can you see the huge shift in society and the direction that it's moving towards? We call it traditional marriage, but it's biblical marriage, because God is the one who defines marriage, not society. We'll dive into that. There's so much that could be said about the brokenness about marriage, but I think most of us are aware of it. We live it. We see it among our coworkers. We see it in our neighborhoods. We see it in the society all around us, I think we're more than aware of how broken the home is, broken families are. In 2002, there was that documentary that came out. Quite frankly, the title of the documentary is silly, but it reveals how bad our society has come when a documentary has to be produced called What is a Woman? By Matt Walsh, a well-known political commentator. The very fact that we're asking the question, what is a woman or what is a man? And we have those that serve on the Supreme Court who can't answer simple questions like that, reveals just how far society has fallen and where we currently are. When that documentary came out, the one who produced it, Matt Walsh, was invited to come and speak at a university, the University of Wisconsin. And while he was there, riots broke out on the campus. And it spread from where he was speaking into the campus itself and all throughout the campus. And they were breaking into buildings and breaking down buildings and setting things on fire, and it turned into fights. It was a horrible scene. But one of the things that I remember that stood out to me that year during those riots that were taking place on the Wisconsin campus was a young lady who went up to a man who was at the protest, a young man, I'm assuming both were students, I don't know, but you have two students. You have a young man who was a student who had a Bible, and he was trying to take a stand for the cause of traditional biblical values. And the young lady, obviously liberal, very angry, annoyed with him, goes up to him, takes the Bible out of his hand, begins to rip the pages out of the Bible, throwing them all around on the ground. Another lady comes up in this scene, you can look it up on YouTube, and she takes the pages of the Bible, rolls them up, sticks them in her mouth, and begins to eat them. And I thought to myself, nothing seems to symbolize symbolically more of what's going on in the world than that very scene there, which has been going on since the beginning of time. It was Genesis 3 and verse number 1 when Satan came to the woman and said to her, "Hath God said?" From the very beginning, the deception has not been what is truth, but can I believe God's truth, who has spoken it? And before we even get into studying these verses and breaking them apart, thought by thought, you really have to come to terms with one particular important truth. Hath God said to us what it is that we should be and what it is that we should do as His creation? Has God given us a design for marriage and the home and society? Has God spoken truth to us in His Word? And more importantly, do we believe it? And maybe the question should be asked this morning to many of us, do you trust God? Society will tell you one thing, and God will always tell you something else, and you have to come to terms with that and ask the question, do I trust God? Do I trust that God knows best? Do I trust when God says something to the ladies in our midst that He knows best for them? And when He speaks to the men in our midst that He knows best for them? And when He speaks to our children that He knows best, and I trust Him. I trust God's truth. I trust God's judgment. I trust God's instructions. And if you're not willing to cross that bridge, you're never going to make it very far in any other category. You're going to question, you're going to doubt, you're going to compare what psychologists say and what the general consensus among society is about a whole array of topics. But you have to come to terms. Do I really, I say I believe the Bible, but do I really believe the Bible? I say I believe in God, but do I really believe God? And that is where we have to start here, because you have to understand, when we're talking about marriage, we're talking about the very first institution that God created. He began with marriage. He didn't begin with the church. In fact, the order of which God created institutions is God created marriage as the first institution. And then He created the home, family. And then He created church. And there's ways you could define that, but church and then government in that order. And it has to be in that order because if the marriage is broken, then the family is broken. And if the family is broken, then the church will be broken. And if the church is broken, then society, government will be broken. God has an order by which He has established the world that we live in, the society that He has put us in, and we have to follow His pattern. So as an introduction this morning because once again, we're going to be defining the parts and the responsibilities within an institution called marriage. But understand that we live in a society that questions whether marriage should even exist. Now, if you would go to Matthew chapter number 19, Jesus is doing what Jesus always is doing. He's in some debate, some argument with the Pharisees, and the question of divorce comes up. And in Matthew 19, verse number 3, the Pharisees came to him, testing him and saying to him, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for just any reason?" Now, the answer that Jesus gives is so simplistic that some people overlook the complexity of it and the profundity of it. So I want to read what he says, but kind of maybe take my time because it's good stuff. Here's Jesus' answer to the Pharisees, verse 4. "And he answered and said to them, 'Have you not read?'" Which is always the problem. This is what he reminds them again and again. "You do err not knowing the Scriptures. Why are you asking me stupid questions? You don't know the Bible. You brag about how you've memorized the Torah. You brag about how you read the Scriptures. You brag about how much you know about the prophets, but you just simply don't know enough yet about the Bible." He says, "Have you not read that He who made them in the beginning," or at the beginning. So Jesus skips past their question and gets to the root of the issue here. What did God want at the beginning of time when God brought this institution into being, when God created marriage? Because that's what we saw there in Genesis 2. God created something. He created marriage. What did God want is what Jesus is getting to. What was the point? What was the intent of it? From the very beginning, He said, He made them, and he quotes Genesis 2, He made them male and female. Notice it ends there. There's not 48 other things. It's male and female. And just, I don't want this to become a gender study class this morning, but let's be clear here this morning. There is no such thing as genders. That is a made-up social construct that is no more than 70, 80 years old. Yes, there have been those that have alluded to such things throughout history's time, but not since the 1950s has it ever been spoken of the way it is today. It was a professor in the 1950s, a professor in Southern California, of all places, a professor who come up with the idea that perhaps society and social conditioning can alter what your sex from birth might be. And from that point on, it became a little bit more mainstream generation after generation until you get to the point to where it is today that it's whatever. Two spirits. I mean, he uses his name. It just goes on and on. There's no end to it. And we've not just redefined gender, but we're redefining marriage in every capacity. And I'm not just talking about gay marriage. There's just a few years ago, there was a lady who legally was married to the Eiffel Tower. In London right now, they're pushing and trying to make it legal so that you can marry your dog if you want to. So there's this breakdown between, well, does marriage have any purpose? Does marriage just mean love? And if I love the Eiffel Tower, I could marry the Eiffel Tower. And she actually got a priest to do it for her. And if I love my dog, and if I love my cat, if I love the park that I go to play at, I mean, it's just anything. I can be married to it, because if marriage is all about love, if marriage has no purpose and meaning outside of love, then marriage can be whatever I want it to be. And it breaks down. But Jesus says here, from the beginning, it was male and female. By design, by the way. Why even make a difference? Why not just make all people and not have sex as part of that? God designed it that way. Every person is born with 46 chromosomes, plus one. If you were a man, a male, you were born with 46 plus XY. If you were a woman, you were born with 46 plus XX. That's the difference. And those chromosomes, think of that as that's kind of the blueprint by which your DNA organizes itself as you develop. It tells your DNA, go here, do this, be this, and it develops you into what you will become. God gave you that. That's by His design. And it has purpose, and it has meaning to it. Once again, God doesn't do anything by mistake. Everything was designed with an ultimate plan, an ultimate purpose behind it. And so Jesus here tells them that from the beginning, He made them just men and women. And verse number 5 says, for this reason. So there's a reason why there's only two sexes. There's a reason why He only made male and female. And He says, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh, the union of marriage. We call this holy matrimony. In all of the weddings I've performed over the years, without fail, at some point, I will mention holy matrimony. We hear that, but we rarely think about what it actually means. Holy means set apart. That matrimony, that means that covenantal vow coming to two people, a man and a woman coming together. It is a holy matrimony. It is a holy covenant of two people coming together. Holy in the sense of a man is setting himself apart from all other women in the world to that woman. And that woman is setting herself apart from all other men in the world to that man. And it is a holy matrimony. It is a holy covenant between the two. And so Jesus says here, the reason for the male-female is that they will come together in this holy matrimony, that they will be united through covenant to become one flesh, one individual. And you say, well, why is that? Well, we'll get into that momentarily, but there's imagery here. There's a spiritual message that's being conveyed. Now notice what He says in verse number 6. So then, they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore. So here is another therefore. There's layers here. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no man separate. Let no Supreme Court separate it and redefine it. Let no government redefine it. Let no societal norms that come about make alterations to it. What God has created, let no man uncreate. What God has made, let no man differ from. It is God's creation. He gets to define it. He's the one that created it. He's the one who has purpose behind it. So what God has joined together, let no man separate. So first of all, marriage is a great gift from God. It is a gift from God. It is not a social construct. You know, the argument I talked a moment ago about how people want to redefine marriage so that it's about love and you can marry whoever you want. And that's becoming kind of old school even in itself. The argument today is why marry? That's an old institution. That's archaic. Why even have that debate? Just get rid of, if you get rid of marriage, we wouldn't have these fights anymore. There wouldn't be division. Just live with who you love. If marriage is about love, which is not, but if marriage is just about love, then marry whoever you want. And then, or then live with whoever you want. Don't even worry about marriage. That's kind of the mentality right now. And of course, that's what Satan would want. Because marriage means something. It points to something. It symbolizes something, and it drives Satan crazy. Point number 1, marriage is a great gift from God. Point number 2, marriage is a great mystery of God. I've alluded to this already multiple times, but let me unpack this thought. Go to Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter number 5 again. As I had mentioned, marriage is a physical representation of a spiritual reality. Everything about God's design and purpose for marriage is pointing to greater truths. That's why He designed it the way He designed it. In Matthew 22 and verse number 2, Jesus talks about marriage in this way. He says, the kingdom of heaven is like a certain man who arranged a marriage for his son. He uses this language again and again. He's constantly talking about the church being the bride of Christ. There's all this imagery that he uses as marriage and the church, marriage and saints. Him being the husband, us being the wife, not physically, but in a spiritual sense. It's symbolically pointing to something. He says in that verse there that the kingdom of heaven, that God, that heaven itself is kind of like marriage. So what he's saying is like, you want to know what heaven looks like? Look at marriage. I designed marriage to model it. I designed marriage to remind you of this. I gave you an object lesson called marriage to point you to the understanding of heaven. In Ephesians 5, if you look at verse number 30, when he gives instructions to husbands, he says, "For we are members of his body and of his flesh and of his bones. For this reason," now he begins to quote Genesis again, "For this reason a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." And then he says this is a great mystery, but I speak concerning Christ and the church. Now, anytime you see that phrase mystery in the New Testament, it always refers to the same thing. It's talking about truths that are now being revealed that were hidden under the old covenant. So it's a mystery being revealed, is what he's saying. The old covenant Christians, those that believed in God and followed God, the old covenant saints, they didn't really see this picture. They didn't understand. They were just doing what God told them to do. Man and wife, marry, covenant, till death do you part. You can do this, you can't do that. All these rules, restrictions given through the law of Moses. Didn't understand what any of it meant. Didn't understand what it was pointing to. Didn't understand what it was representing. Well, Paul is saying all of it to them was a great mystery. But to us, living in the fulfillment of the church, living in the fulfillment of the new covenant, we look at it and go, wow. It all meant something. It was all pointing to something, which is why Jesus was passionate about it. You ever noticed how the terms, the words adultery and idolatry sound similar to each other? That's because they're more closely related than you realize. Adultery is when you cheat on your spouse. You go outside of that covenant that you have with one another. You go outside of the boundaries of that union of one flesh with one another. That's adultery, and it's a sin, and it's wrong. Idolatry is when you go outside of the covenantal relationship that you and God have together. You are His, and He is yours. And when you go about serving other gods or worshiping other gods, whether you know it or not, it's the things that you're putting before Him. That's called idolatry. This is why he uses this imagery. This is same. That's the spiritual reality, and marriage is the physical reality of that. And so these are the lessons. And I think it's also important that you understand, I'm just going to throw this out there really quick. Marriage is temporal. If you're a reader, and I'd encourage you to be a reader, there's a really good book written on this. I forgot when it was written, probably 10 years ago or so now, by a pastor, theologian named John Piper. He wrote a book, a very small book. If you like reading small books, this will be a good book for you. It's called This Momentary Marriage. This Momentary Marriage. And what he does in that book is he unpacks what God has designed marriage to be. Some of the same passages that I'm looking at today. But he calls it this momentary marriage, which sounds weird. It's like, I thought it was till death do us part. I thought marriage is like forever. It's called momentary because marriage is not something God meant to be eternal. It's only earthly. It's something meant for our lives for this time. In Matthew 22 and verse number 30, Jesus said, "For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels of God in heaven." There's no married people in heaven. I know some of you don't like to hear that. After the first service, a gentleman asked me, he said, "So I'm not going to be with my wife in heaven?" It's like, of course you're going to be with your wife in heaven. Believe it or not, you're going to love her infinitely more then than you do now. And you'll, Ray's not in here. I pointed to, Ray was across the room, standing in the lobby. I said, and you'll love Ray more than you love your wife right now in heaven too. You'll love everyone. Everyone in heaven will love each other with a godlike love. It'll be perfect. But no, there's no sexes in heaven. You won't need those body parts anymore. And there won't need to be that imagery or distinction or picture anymore. It'll all be fulfilled in heaven. In Luke 20 and verse number 34, Jesus said, the sons of this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are accounted worthy to obtain that age and the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. Marriage is just something for this age, and it's meant to display something for this age. It's communicating something to this age, and it won't exist in the age to come. We'll be in our spiritual bodies in the age to come. We'll be perfected. We will know him as we are known. We will become what we were meant to be from eternity past in the age to come. This is what it means in Revelation 19 and verse number 7, and when it says, let us be glad and rejoice and give him glory, for the marriage of the Lamb has come and his wife has made herself ready. He's talking about the church, using this language about a wife getting ready for her wedding day. That's all imagery pointing to when Christ returns and we enter into that eternal state forever. And he uses the imagery of marriage to convey that. And so marriage is a great gift from God. Marriage is a great mystery of God. Number 3, very briefly here, marriage is a great mystery or ministry to God. Marriage is a great ministry to God. If you're there in Ephesians 5, look at verse 25 again. He says, instructions to the husbands, he says, husbands, love your wives just as. That's the important words in that verse. Just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her, that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word, that he might present her to himself, a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she should be holy and without blemish. We say that's just talking about the church. Yeah, it's talking about the church, and it's talking about marriage. Thus the words, just as. He's given instructions to husbands saying, just as Christ loves the bride, his church, the spiritual bride, and he sanctifies her, means he makes her holy, he makes her good, he makes her blessed, he makes her righteous. Just as Christ does that for the church, just as Christ sacrificially gives to the church, just as Christ brings the church along and helps it to become righteous, you husbands, you do the same thing for your wives. Just as Christ did that for us individually as Christians, husbands, do that for your wives. That's the instructions here. That's called ministry. Husbands, you have a ministry. You're to minister to your wives. Love your wives. Serve your wives. Be the spiritual leader in your home. For wives, he says in 1 Corinthians chapter number 7, and a woman who has a husband who does not believe, if he is willing to live with her, let her not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband. Otherwise, your children would be unclean, but now they are holy. What is he talking about here? Because a wife is willing to be the spiritual leader in the home, in the absence of spiritual leadership, she brings a level of sanctification to that home, holiness, righteousness into that home. It in part brings a blessing to the children, it says. It brings a blessing to the husband. You're bringing righteousness into the marriage. It's your ministry to your husband. Wives have a ministry to their husbands, and husbands have a ministry to their wives. He goes on to say, but if the unbelieving departs, let him depart. A brother or a sister is not under bondage in such cases, but God has called us to peace. For how do you know, O wife, whether you will save your husband? Or how do you know, O husband, whether you will save your wife? So it's a mutual here. It's not just wives he's giving this instruction. He's saying to wives and husbands, by you living a spiritual life and leading in a spiritual example in your home, how do you not know that that is going to bring salvation into the life of your husband, or salvation into the life of your wife, or salvation to your children? How do you not know that your ministry, your spiritual ministry in your home is not going to bring spiritual blessings? And so marriage is a great ministry to God. In the first century, one of the number one means by which salvation was spreading across the Greco-Roman Empire were spouses becoming Christians and leading their husband, their wife, to faith in Jesus Christ. Several people told me after the first service that it was because of their wife that they became a Christian. Their wife led them to the Lord. That's their wife's ministry to them, and that's exactly what he's talking about here. So marriage is a great ministry to God. Marriage is a great mystery of God. Marriage is a great gift from God. Lastly, as we just a second here in Genesis chapter number 1, I'm going to read it very quickly here. Marriage is a great mission for God. You say a great mission. What kind of a mission are we talking about? Well, from the very beginning of the institution of marriage, God gave a mission to Adam and Eve. This was the mission. Then God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over every living thing that moves on the earth." You know, it's a misnomer. I've heard this so many times over the years that the first command that God gave mankind was not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I don't know how that myth got started, but that's not the first command given in the Bible. The first command given in the Bible was go have sex. That's exactly what he says. Then God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply." It's a very polite way. What do you think it means? It means exactly what you think it means. He said, now that I've created you, Adam and Eve, go get a hotel. Do what you're supposed to do. I made you a certain way to function a certain way. Now make it happen. It's beautiful. It's godly. It's righteous. It's what I designed. The very first command in Scripture was to go multiply, have children, procreation. God created that. It's by design, and that's an image, that's a spiritual image as well. The church was never meant to be us four no more. The church is supposed to have offspring. The church is supposed to grow. It's supposed to flourish. It's supposed to go throughout the earth. It's all an imagery of that. Every part of the home is pointing to a spiritual reality. And so from the very beginning, that was the command. And it was repeated shortly after that because man lost track of the command and went about doing his own way, and it was nothing but evil in every man's heart, and God had to destroy the earth with a flood. You remember that? Noah and his ark? And as soon as Noah gets off of the ark, in Genesis chapter 9 and verse number 1, God repeats the command. So God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." Go procreate. Go do what I designed you to do. I created this institution called marriage, and this is what it does. It grows. And I'd love to belabor this point a little bit more, but this is what marriage does. It doesn't sit for decades deciding, well, should we have kids now or later? I'd like to get my business going, or when all bills are paid off, and when we're into a nice house and things are set, and when we're able to get all that travel out of our system and we've seen the world and we're ready to settle in, maybe we'll talk about a child and 2 or 3 dogs, something of that nature. No, it has never changed. This is what I've created. This is why I created it. This is what it does in the midst of that. Now go do it. Go have babies. God loves that. God rejoices in that. If there's ever a time we need that right now, statistically, that's a whole other data point, but on a scientific level, if we don't start having more babies, we're in trouble in this world right now. But go have babies. It needs to happen. It's something that God has called the marriage home to do. Malachi chapter number 2, the prophet says this: "The Lord has been witness between you and the wife of your youth, with whom you have dealt treacherously. Yet she is your companion and your wife by covenant. But did he not make them one, having a remnant of the Spirit?" And why one? Once again, God has a reason for everything. Why one? The answer: He seeks godly offspring. Therefore, take heed to your spirit, and let none deal treacherously with his wife or with the wife of his youth, for the Lord God of Israel says that he hates divorce. There's very few things in the Bible that God explicitly says, "I hate." This is one of them. I hate divorce. But that's beside the point. The main point here is this. He says, why do I want you to be one? Why do I want you to procreate? The reason? I seek godly offspring. I want to see a world flourished with children that love me and know me and worship me. One of the reasons why when God came to this earth, he wanted the children to come to him for such is the kingdom of heaven, he says. He says, let them come to me. It's a beautiful thing. It's what I designed. I designed humanity to reproduce itself through procreation. So I'll end with this verse. I'm out of time. I'll end with Hebrews 13 and verse number 4. Listen to these instructions. It says, marriage is honorable among all. In other words, marriage is an honorable thing. Most secular societies throughout human history have even recognized that. They see it as a good thing. They see it as a good thing because without it, society falls apart. It is the thing that keeps society glued and hinged. Without it, it dies. But beyond that, it's an honorable thing because it's what God designed. And when the world, and we're the world, when the world functions as God designed it to function, things work. They do well. There's harmony. There's love. There's prosperity. And so it's honorable among all. And the bed undefiled. Prostitution is defiled. Adultery is defiled. Going outside the boundaries of what God had created for the marriage and the home, that's defiling. And why is it defiling? Well, it destroys the whole imagery that God was creating. It destroys the spiritual meaning upon which they represent. This is why you can't redefine marriage to a man marries a man. Like, what picture is that presenting? That's why God despises it. It destroys the whole message of that he's displaying. He says, you don't get it, do you? You don't see that there's something bigger going on than there's two people in love with each other. It has meaning behind it, and you can't redefine it. But he says, fornicators and adulterers, God will judge. Those that want to come along and destroy marriage and redefine marriage or be unfaithful in marriage, you can live and do whatever you want in your life, but understand God is watching. And you're messing with His institution. You're messing with something He created, something He designed, something He organized and ordered. And when you go beyond what He has given, you will face His judgment. That's what He says. He will judge. I think it's one of the reasons at the beginning there, verse number 21, he says, submitting to one another in the fear of God. People don't fear God. They don't think that He's actually going to judge them. They think they can just change everything that God's created, go beyond what God has said, do whatever they want, and they don't have anything to worry about. But God reminds us again and again, you don't change my ways. They are my ways, and they're righteous, and they're good, and I will judge those who go beyond that. This is not the type of stuff we like to hear, is it? It's not politically correct. But it's correct. It's from Scripture, and we need to hear this.